The silent noise. In the street. The silent noise. And beneath my feet, I feel the purring and murmuring of tubes. Phoning up and turning off. Buttons, taps, levers, controls.
Well, Centrally Heated Knickers is a what? It's a new theatre piece, and it's based on the poetry of Michael Rosen about science, or as he would say, they're about science and imagination. They're kind of comments and reflections about scientific processes and the way in which they affect our everyday life.
I stand in the street, and in my ear, I feel the vibrating and pulsating of tunes.
About 16 years ago, I met a jazz sax player called Tim Whitehead, and the two of us shared our music, and we got on well, and we decided we'd work together on some projects. The outcome was forming an ensemble of jazz musicians and classical musicians, and we called it the Homemade Orchestra. We'd both write bits of music for it, and sometimes it's, as with this Centrally Heated Knickers, it's a very small group. In fact, it's just a trio. One of the delights for me of this whole project was being able to put together such a wonderful team. The idea there was a miniature young person's guide to the orchestra. In that, Tim is all things wind, and he blows everything from saxes to bass clarinet, whoopee whistle, recorder and teapot. Then Dave is all things sort of strummed and plucked. He mainly focuses on a guitar, but he plays a bicycle at one point and things like that. And Jim is all things hit, tuned percussion and a drum kit and bottles and plates and cups and pans. So you see, you know, the three kinds of music that you can make, the three kinds of instruments that are built: wind instruments, plucked instruments, and hit instruments. This new show called Centrally Heated Knickers is much more theatrical, and it involves set, lighting, design, a dancer, and more of a narrative. Lots of props and lots of interesting and quirky kind of scenes.
I think it's an interesting show. It's a departure for me and Colin, because when we were doing Nonsense with Michael, we both felt that it would be really great to go one stage further and make what we were doing more theatrical, and maybe bring somebody else in who could mime and use puppets and express the poems and the music in another medium.
There is a fourth member of the band, and that's Maisie Whitehead. Her main role is as a dancer and an actor, and she sometimes is working in partnership with Michael. She kind of is Michael sometimes, and or Michael's memory of him as a child. And she's also a kind of link to the audience. I think the audience really pick up on that and really enjoy watching her because she's physical. We've built up quite a strong relationship with Michael Rosen a few years back, using his nonsense poetry to make a show, which is really just a show of music and poetry. Musically, we're just using something in the poem to paint that in sound, really. That's kind of an interesting way of working.
There are a number of things one has to juggle here. One of them is how music works itself. Music begins somewhere and it goes through a journey and it ends, and then we have Michael's words. So how do those two dovetail? And they're not necessarily sung, because sometimes Michael is speaking, the musicians are playing, Maisie is moving, sometimes there are songs, and sometimes two things are happening in parallel, and sometimes they're not in parallel.
A couple of poems that I've used actually took a recording of Michael saying the poem. As a composer, you've got Michael's own voice as a sound source to sort of mess around with. So in the way that his poems are quite playful and change the order of words, you can do that musically as well. And I use the pitch of his voice, the rise and fall of his voice, to outline the kind of melody. So in a way, I was composing off his performance.
One of the biggest challenges is that we've had to do some things that we don't normally do when we go out and perform. When I go out and perform, I might move around and dance a little bit to the music, but I don't normally get taught dance steps that I then have to perform on stage at the same time as playing a saxophone. And this gives the whole show another dimension, together with the business of being able to have theatrical lighting and a wonderful set that Jason Southgate designed for us, where funny things happen to it and things light up and the sun and moon and stars suddenly appear from the back of the set. And it's really good fun.
Centrally Heated Knickers, it's a show about science, imagination and sound. Actually, talking of sound, what's going on over there?
I love hybrid. Anything that mixes the things that people think are pure. You know, I write poems. It's possible to stand up and read a poem and then sit down again. That's very kind of pure. It's possible to get up and play a piece of music and sit down, and that's fine. But I think something exciting happens the moment you create hybrid forms, when you start marrying poetry with music, with film, with acting that isn't connected to the poetry. And I think exciting things happen like that. So then it's really like sparks between poles. But if you've got a poetry pole and you've got a music pole, then pa-chung, the thing that happens between the two is then exciting for an audience.
It's interesting working on this because we're working with Michael Rosen's wonderful words and poetry, and at the same time we're working with a little bit of kind of theatre and physical theatre between Michael and Maisie, the interaction of them and the interaction of the music with that. And some things have to be timed quite acutely. Some things are a bit broader and easier to slot in. But the interesting thing is how the music feeds the words and the words feed the music. The challenging things about being involved in the production really are to do, for me personally, are to do with the three roles, and sometimes also to do with the fact that there are a couple of moments when I'm on stage singing and playing the saxophone and dancing all in the same number, which is challenging. And there are many moments in the performance where there is a very strong message about what is important in life in general, and the words of Michael that we've worked with really say this strongly, and I'm very proud of that life is not an examination that you get right or wrong. It's a journey, it's a voyage in which you have to make lots of mistakes to discover, to uncover, and to enrich your life.
The interesting thing for me is, given the audience this is going to, principally young people, is whether the show will inspire you to be creative. Will it encourage you to be more interested perhaps in science than you were? Hopefully there will be an educational element in it, but the main reason for doing the show is to try and waken up the idea that science is a creative process. It's like making theatre. You have to experiment, you have to try things, and you have to be prepared to fail. We want the audience to be involved, but also to go forward after the show and to ask further questions like, how does electricity actually work? You know, how does the digital media affect our lives? How can I get involved in this? How can I do things? Or how can I write about them? Or how do I observe the world and my place in it?